Going over our last couple problems from sections 4.5 and 4.7. Um, Looking at 4.5, looking at like 73 through 76. I'm just going to talk about all of them, even though they're not necessarily on your review. But it's asking to find a and d for the function f of x equals a times the cosine of x plus d, such that the graph f matches the figure. For number 73, my advice is when you're drawing or when you're working with graphs that you're already given, draw the midline. So to kind of figure out where that line kind of cuts it midway through the wave. So that's going to help us out with our amplitude. Our amplitude is going to be from the midline either to the bottom, oops, sorry, wrong one, to the bottom or to the top. So either way, our A value is 2. Now the other part, the D part, is the part that's been shifted up or down. So I guess I should just say a vertical shift. So typically on the parent function for cosine, the midline's on the x-axis at y equals 0. So in this case, it's been shifted up 1. So in this case, the d value would be positive 1. For number 74, if I were to draw the midline here, the midline would be right about, oh, I got to shift that up a little bit too, sorry. Would be right about there. So again, this one's going to also have an amplitude of 2 because it goes 2 down and 2 up. So again, A equals 2. And the midline's been shifted down 1, so in this case, it'd be D of negative 1. Number 75, drawing that midline again. So using this scale here, we got to make sure you're paying attention to that. The A value, like it looks honestly the same height as the previous two examples, but the scale here would be an A of 4. It has an amplitude of 4. In this case, the D value is also 4 because it's been shifted up by 4. Number 76, drawing the midline that cuts midway through. This would have just an amplitude of 1. So again, that height and that height and that height. So an amplitude of 1, and it's been shifted down by 3 units, so we'd say a D of negative 3. So make sure you're paying attention to that as you're going through. Couple of the things on section 4.7, just going over a couple problems here. Arc cosine of 1/2. So we're asking what angle, essentially, cosine of what angle gives us 1/2. So if we go to the unit circle for looking at arc cosine or inverse cosine or whichever you want to prefer, you're really looking at quadrants 1 and 2. So we're looking where in quadrants 1 and 2 do we get a cosine of 1/2. Remember, the cosine is the x coordinate. So we got a cosine of at 60 degrees or at pi over 3, it's got a cosine of 1/2. So we'd say it's at pi over 3. Arc tangent. Tangents are always a little bit harder. Arctan of negative root 3. So arc tangents, remember, we're looking just in quadrants 1 and 4, so just over on the left side here. So it's going to be it's going to be down in quadrant 3, because if we have a negative tangent, that means it's got to be a negative x value or a negative y value, but just one or the other, not both. So we got to figure out which of these three options are going to give us a y value divided by the x value that gives us just the negative square root of 3. Looking at this one here, if we do negative square root of 3 over 2 over 1/2, I'm writing on the actual unit circle instead of in the notes, but whatever, you'd end up with negative root 3 over 2 times 2 over 1, so the 2's would cancel, oh, whoa, goodness gracious, what happened there? Sorry. So the 2's would cancel out, and we'd be just left with negative root 3. So that means the inverse, or the tangent at 300 degrees, or more importantly 5 pi over 3, would be, negative root 3. The thing about it is we are talking about a negative version of that angle. So that negative version, kind of thinking about the absolute size, it's the same as that reference angle, same as that 60 degrees. So we would describe that as negative 60 degrees, or in terms of radians, negative pi over 3. Then for inverse sine of negative root 3 over 2, we're looking for where the sine is equal to negative root 3 over 2. That's on the right side of the circle in quadrants 1 and 3, or sorry, 1 and 4. Wow, I actually chose these three at random, and they all have very, very closely related questions. That negative root 3 over 2, we already have that as our y value down here. So it's at that same angle that we got on the previous one, so it ends up being at negative pi over 3. So remember, any time you get an angle measure in quadrant 4 when describing the inverse sine and inverse tangent, you got to make sure you're describing as the negative version of that angle.